The smell inside the white Pontiac hit the officer before the trunk was fully open. It was sharp and sour, the kind of odor that made the back of the throat tighten, the kind Florida deputies associated with decay. The car had been towed from an Orlando lot in June 2008 after a young mother said it had run out of gas and walked away. Her name was Caylee Anthony. She was 22, quick with a smile and good at talking past hard questions. But the longer anyone listened, the clearer it became that something in her life did not add up. 2-year-old Caylee Marie Anthony had not been seen by her grandparents in more than a month. Her grandmother, Cindy, finally called 911 after a bitter argument the night of July 15th. In one of those calls, her voice shaking, she told the dispatcher that her granddaughter had been missing for 31 days and that the car Caylee had been driving smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car. From that moment, detectives treated the Anthony home as the center of a possible homicide, not just a family dispute. Caylee had been born in August 2005, while Caylee still lived with her parents just outside Orlando. Neighbors saw a close household and a little girl who was nearly always with her grandparents. In June 2008, Caylee left the house with Caylee, saying she was staying with a nanny and working extra shifts. Days turned into weeks. When Cindy asked to see her granddaughter, Caylee claimed they were at the beach, at theme parks, staying with friends. She said she worked at Universal Studios and left Caylee with a babysitter named Zanny when she could not bring her along. No one in the family had ever met this woman, but the excuses kept coming, covering a long stretch of time in which no one but Caylee could say they had actually seen the child. On July 15th, that story finally collapsed. Cindy tracked Caylee to a friend's apartment and demanded to see Caylee. There was no child there. After a tense drive home and a shouting match in the kitchen, Cindy called 911 3 times, reporting theft, the smell in the car, and then the missing toddler. Deputies responded to find a shaken grandmother, a guarded grandfather, and a daughter whose account shifted every time she opened her mouth. At the sheriff's office, Caylee said she had last seen Caylee with the nanny, whose full name she gave as Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. She supplied an apartment complex and claimed to have dropped Caylee off there. Detectives went to the address and learned that no one by that name had ever lived in the unit. When they checked her employment at Universal Studios, she insisted she worked there until officers walked her through the halls, and she finally admitted she did not. The nanny was fictional, the job was a lie, and Caylee still refused to say where her daughter was. Meanwhile, the Pontiac became the physical focus of the case. It had been towed after sitting abandoned. When George and Cindy retrieved it, both later said the smell from the trunk reminded them of a dead body. Inside, detectives found a trash bag with rotting food, but also traces they could not ignore. Forensic tests on air samples suggested compounds consistent with human decomposition. A strand of hair showing characteristics of hair from a decomposing body matched Caylee's DNA profile. Carpet from the trunk showed possible decomposition staining and traces of chloroform. The methods would later be challenged, but to investigators, the car looked like a place where a body had been kept. Caylee was arrested on charges of lying to law enforcement and child neglect. As she sat in jail, investigators pulled phone records, computer logs, and witness statements. Friends described her staying at her boyfriend's apartment, going to clubs, entering a hot body contest, and getting a tattoo that read, Bella Vita, beautiful life. There were plenty of photos of her laughing and drinking. There were none of Caylee. Search teams and volunteers combed woods and ponds around Orlando. Then, on December 11th, 2008, a county utility worker cutting through brush near the Anthony home noticed a small skull in a wooded lot less than half a mile away. Deputies responded and found the scattered skeletal remains of a child. Nearby lay plastic trash bags, a canvas laundry bag, and pieces of duct tape. Later examination showed the tape had been placed where it would have covered the mouth and nose. DNA testing confirmed the remains were Caylee's. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide by undetermined means. The bones did not show obvious trauma, but the duct tape, the dumping of the body in the woods, and the month in which no one reported an accident all pointed away from any natural death. A grand jury had already indicted Caylee on first-degree murder and related charges. After the discovery, the state announced it would seek the death penalty. The trial opened in May 2011 in a courtroom lined with cameras. Prosecutors told the jury that Caylee had killed Caylee in mid-June with chloroform and duct tape, stored her in the trunk, and later dumped her in the woods. They highlighted internet searches for chloroform on the family computer, the smell and forensic results from the Pontiac, the duct tape on the skull, and Caylee's partying during the weeks her daughter was missing. Her lies to police, they argued, were deliberate attempts to obstruct the investigation until the body could not tell its story. The defense offered a very different account. Lead attorney Jose Baez said Caylee had drowned accidentally in the family pool and that George Anthony helped dispose of the body in a panic. He claimed George had sexually abused Caylee for years, teaching her to lie and hide. George denied every allegation. There were no witnesses to a drowning, no 911 call, and no physical proof of long-term abuse, but the defense did not have to prove its narrative, only suggest that the state's version was not the only explanation. Over 6 weeks, jurors heard from forensic scientists, officers, friends, and family. Some experts backed the prosecution. Others testified that key tests, such as air sample analysis for decomposition, were new and not widely accepted. A computer record once described as dozens of chloroform searches turned out to involve a single visit to a page with that word. On July 5, 2011, the jury returned to a packed courtroom. The clerk read the verdicts: not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter, not guilty of aggravated child abuse. Caylee Anthony was convicted only on 4 misdemeanor counts of giving false information to law enforcement. With credit for time served, she left jail within weeks. Outside, crowds reacted with anger and disbelief. For many who had followed the case on television every day, the circumstantial pattern seemed overwhelming. Jurors later explained that prosecutors had never shown exactly how Caylee died, and that without a clear cause of death, the science and behavior evidence still left room for reasonable doubt. They were convinced Caylee had lied, but not convinced beyond that standard that the state's theory of murder was the only possible one. In the years since, the Anthony case has remained a reference point in debates about media trials, forensic science, and the distance between public outrage and the legal requirement for proof. Caylee has mostly stayed out of sight, occasionally surfacing in interviews that reignite anger. What happened to Caylee in those missing days has never been definitively established in court. What remains is a narrow run of facts: a month when a little girl vanished from view, a car trunk that smelled of death, a child's bones left in the woods, and a verdict that answered the charges on paper but left the central questions hanging over the name Caylee Anthony. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.